Shalom. So I am fortunate that I continue to work mostly from home, but when I have to come into the office and, I'm not hobbled and whatever, I'm a 2-minute drive or a 5-minute walk from work. But for those of you who have to drive to work, I have nothing but empathy. No, seriously, and one of the great frustrations for me, because, if you know me well, I like predictability. Okay, I also uncharacteristically for a Jew, like being on time. Right, and so if I have to go to a meeting, let's say at Or Kodesh, right? I'm going to a meeting at Or Kodesh. How long is that drive? Could be 20, 25 minutes, could be an hour, right? Well, how do I know? There's no way to know. It doesn't matter if the meeting is at, so we figure the meeting's at 9 o'clock, it's rush hour. By the way, rush hour is the most ridiculous thing. Nobody's rushing anywhere, right? I had a cab driver in Chicago who said it was from Africa once, and he said to me, back home in Kenya, we call it the go slow, right? And that's what it is. It's really the go slow. It's not rush hour, but anyway. All right, so if it's rush hour, it's gonna take an hour. But the meeting is at 11, I figure it should only be half an hour. No way, you just don't know, right? So if you're a normal person, so you'll be half an hour late for the meeting. If you're me, you're gonna leave an hour before the meeting and wind up spending 30 minutes on your phone in the parking lot, right? But this not knowing how long your trip is gonna take drives me nuts, right? And it's not, look, I don't like driving in traffic, although since I traded in the Fit, which was a standard shift, for the HRV, which is an automatic, driving traffic is not quite as terrible as it was before, but I don't like it. But what I really hate is the unpredictability, right? I want to feel that I'm in control, but the illusion that we have control over environment is just that, it's an illusion. Right, there's an interesting contrast in this week's Parashat. I spoke in my 2-minute Torah and I spoke in my Drasha last night about the oddity of the fact that the gifts for the construction of the Mishkan were voluntary. Right, we just read Shabbat Shekalim. Every man over the age of 20 gives half a shekel precisely, right? The rich don't give more, the poor don't give less, everybody gives half a shekel. But for the construction of the tabernacle, how much do you give? Kol asher yivenu libo, right? As much as your heart prompts you to give, and this is odd. Right, because most of the commandments are very specific, right? But what follows this commandment to bring a voluntary offering is then not what you would expect. Because you might say that given a free will offering, that each person would bring whatever they want, right? But it's not so. Maybe because the Torah knew the Jews, right? And if you work in our office, people are constantly bringing the dreckiest dreck you could possibly imagine that nobody has any use for, okay? We have an inventory of Hasidic rabbi statues and paintings, right? That if Hasidic rabbi statues and paintings were currency, we would not have to sell the building. Because everybody who moves to Florida or to Leisure World brings us their Hasidic rabbi statues and paintings, right? Which we have no use for. And no, anybody here want Hasidic rabbi statues and paintings, right? No. Okay. But so the next several verses give a very detailed list of exactly what is needed. Okay, and not among the things that are needed are Hasidic rabbi statues and paintings, right? And then the rest of the parsha and the next several parshiot give detailed instructions for the construction of the whole edifice, right? Nothing is left to chance. It's very, very precise. Okay, now I want to share with you something that happened really now a number of years ago when I still lived in Connecticut, okay? I had a fellowship with an organization called CLAL that some of you may know. And this was shortly, well, so a couple of years, I think this was in 2010 or 2011. But we began one of our meetings with a briefing by a very high official from Goldman Sachs. And he spent about 2 hours explaining to us how the financial meltdown of September 2008 occurred. Right? Remember this financial meltdown of September 2008, right? And his briefing and his explanation was very interesting and very thorough. And you could see that it was interesting for him too, because he was an economist and he had to be able to translate his jargon, his lingo, into language that was accessible to 25 rabbis, right? Just as I sometimes have to translate, right? I would use different language in my Drasha and my Torah introductions and whatever, if I was speaking only to rabbis, right? But I'm not, so I have to learn how to speak and sometimes even succeed in doing so in language that normal people can understand, right? But this guy's bottom line was that no one could have predicted what happened because never before in US history had housing lost so much value so quickly, right? Housing always goes up in value, and even if the borrower defaults, you at least still have the asset, right? And you know, at our board meeting the other night, as Bob Wasserman explained it, being somebody who understands these things, we don't have an asset problem, we have a cash flow problem, right? Because we own the building, well, we have a mortgage on it, but basically we own the building. The building has value, right? But the building is not liquid, right? You can't spend the building, right? And eventually we'll sell it, but until we do, we ain't got no money, right? We have assets, but we have no money, right? And that's what the bank historically have said, right? I mean, if the borrower defaults on their mortgage, Nishkaferlach, we have the house. Because the house isn't gonna lose value, because houses never lose value, right? So, as he put it, the lenders knew that there was credit risk, but not asset risk, right? Because a collapse of housing values never occurs and cannot occur, right? So since the thing which never occurs and cannot occur occurred, it caught everybody off guard, right? And then he said, nobody could have predicted this. Nobody did anything wrong. It's nobody's fault, right? And I find it a little frustrating because if something is no one's fault and no one did anything wrong, then there's no way to prevent it from happening again, right? And as someone who depends on the equity in my home, right, to make it possible to enjoy at least a minimally decent standard of living when I retire, I find this kind of scary, right? And so many people in our communities and our neighborhoods are now suffering with tremendous uncertainty over will they still have a job or will they continue to have a job, right? I mean, there are certain things that you could always count on that you could no longer count on. For example, it was certainly a given in American foreign policy since 1945 that we side with democracy and not with dictatorship, right? Since yesterday, that's no longer a given, right? And so when you live in a world where even things that are entirely predictable, that everybody knows will never happen, right? It's tremendously frustrating. And the building and the creation of the tabernacle contrasts, therefore, fundamentally with life as we know it, right? We try to impose order on chaos and create predictability rather than randomness, right? And technology has allowed us to do this more than ever before, right? I mean, for example, to go back to my traffic frustration, right? I get in the car, I plug in my destination, and it tells me my arrival time, right? And so now I have order instead of randomness, right? But then when I don't get there on time and it's constantly recalculating to take into account traffic or a stalled car or whatever, my attempt to impose order on chaos has failed, and I feel frustrated because in our high-tech society, we feel that every problem has a solution, right? But as H.L. Mencken, I think it was him who said, every problem has a solution, which is simple, elegant, and wrong, right? But Americans, because we have lived in the society we've lived in, which has basically been an orderly society, right? And now it's a chaotic society. right? But we feel as if we have a constitutional right never to have anything bad happen to us, right? And everything that we know, and I don't care whether you voted for the current administration or didn't vote for the current administration, right? Everything that we know has been upended, right? I mean, everything that we know has been upended. For example, a couple of days ago, I ran to Kelly and I said, good news, you got your disability check, right? Because would anybody be surprised if all of a sudden that their social security check just stopped? No, right? No, because we're living in a chaos society, right? And some people find that attractive. Most people find that not particularly attractive, right? We want order. We want to know that when you do A, B happens, right? And when you do A and C or D or X or L happens instead, right? This is frustrating, right? And I've quoted before Chancellor Emeritus Arnold Eisen's insight on the role of ritual, right? In our lives, we rarely get anything completely right. Right? None of us are the spouse we could be, right? We're a good spouse, but we could be better, right? We're a good parent, but we could be better, right? We're good at our job, but we could be better, right? And ritual provides us with something in our lives that we can actually get right. And Rabbi Ben Greenberg writes about the Mishkan, the tabernacle. It functioned as that place, the one place where a person could truly gain a glimpse and feel order in the world. The place where the very definition of order, God, rested, and where we could feel God's presence. Once a person left the tabernacle, they re-entered the chaotic, unpredictable world of humanity, but for a short time, they experienced true calm as they dwelt in the house of God, right? Our shul should serve for us as that place where we gather ourselves, we find strength, and we gain a glimpse of the divine order that ultimately runs our lives. It's our refuge from the hectic and seemingly random existence we are a part of throughout our lives, okay? And one element of that order and that non-randomness, I really try to make sure that services end at noon. I really do. So I'm gonna end my Drash now. Shabbat Shalom. And because it's Rosh Chodesh, we have a different Amidah. We do continue with the Kaddish before the Amidah on page 155 or 428, but then for Musaf, we turn to 166 in the Shabbat Siddur, 486 in the full Siddur, and again, we'll say the first two pages together through the Kedusha, and then continue individually. Please rise and drink.
Yitgadal ve'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah. Ve'alma divrak yirtzeh ve'amlich malchuteh v'chayekonu b'yo momechon u'chayedecho b'et Yisrael ba'agala ubizman kari ve'meru amen Yehi shmei rabban mevorach Le'alamon ve'almaya Yifaram